Hello and welcome, my name is Haas, and this is a look at Dragon Age Inquisition, specifically a look at the Tempest specialization for the Rogue class. I'll start with an overview of all the Tempest abilities and passives, and secondly, I'll show you how you can unlock Tempest in the game through the Way of the Tempest quest. As I've said in my Knight Enchanter video, specializations require quite a bit more effort to unlock in Inquisition compared to the previous two games. So, the Tempest is one of three specializations for the Rogue, the other two being the Assassin and the Artificer. The Tempest is basically a combat alchemist, and I would highly recommend this specialization if you are building your Rogue as a dagger rogue. It synergizes incredibly well with the dagger abilities, far more so than if you were to go for archery, and is definitely, in my experience, the best melee rogue specialization in the game. Starting with the abilities, you can immediately pick one of two options as a Tempest. The first active ability is called Flask of Frost. Flasks are the main mechanic of the Tempest. They are short but incredibly useful buffs and cannot be used at the same time. The goal is essentially chaining the flasks after one another. Flask of Frost is then both useful for offensive and mainly defensive purposes. It gives you a flat 85% damage resistance for 5 seconds, crucial if you want your rogue to survive on the higher difficulties. Furthermore, although it is worded a bit differently in the description, Flask of Frost will freeze anyone in melee range, not just those that attack you directly. Now, one of the great advantages of freezing enemies in melee range, beyond it, of course, putting them out of the fight for a short while, is that two of your best dagger abilities are precision detonators, meaning you can freeze enemies with Flask of Frost and then hit them with either Twin Fangs or Death Blow in order to do a shatter combo for a ton of extra cold damage. You can then also upgrade Flask of Frost with the Bitter Chill passive, which taunts all nearby enemies when you use Flask of Frost. Now, as you already freeze enemies regardless of whether they actually attack you, the only use out of this passive is some extra utility, depending on your party composition. The second active ability on the other side of the Tempest tree is called Flask of Fire. Similar to Flask of Frost, Flask of Fire is a 5-second buff, and the main purpose of this ability is making all your other abilities cost no stamina. The passive upgrade to Flask of Fire is called Unquenchable Flames, and this is what truly makes this ability useful. With the passive upgrade, Flask of Fire now also prevents abilities from going on cooldown. For the entirety of the Flask of Fire duration, abilities won't go on cooldown and won't cost any stamina, allowing you to spam your best abilities in quick succession, especially great as a dagger rogue, as spamming Twin Fangs or preferably Death Blow on a wounded enemy is some of the best bursts that you can do in the game. You then have two passives on either side of the tree. After Flask of Frost comes the passive called Flask Master, which increases your maximum potion count by 1 and gives you a 25% chance not to put a cooldown on the Flask ability when you use it. And after Flask of Fire comes the passive called Fury of the Storm, which gives you a 10% damage increase whenever you are below 50% of your total stamina. We then arrive to the Tempest focus ability called 1000 Cuts, which does pretty much what the title says. You start cutting up your enemies very rapidly, doing 300% weapon damage every hit with a maximum of 38 hits. This is simply an incredibly high damage focus ability and also protects your rogue during the duration of it. We then have two more passives. On the Flask of Frost side we have Ride the Storm, a very useful passive that increases the duration of your flasks from 5 to 8 seconds if you use a flask quickly after another expires, which is essentially what we'll be doing all the time, making this a very handy passive. And on the Flask of Fire side we have Killer's Alchemy, which gives you a 15% damage bonus for 10 seconds after using a flask or a potion. Then finally, the last active ability is called Flask of Lightning. For 5 seconds you enter a personal haste mode, which slows down everyone around you by 60%, basically allowing you to get a lot of free damage in. Quicksilver then greatly upgrades Flask of Lightning, which reduces everyone around you by another 39% for a total of 99% speed reduction, essentially freezing them in time. Plus, it increases Flask of Lightning's duration by 2 seconds. I should note that Flask of Fire seems to have an exploit with it currently. I fully expect this to be changed in an upcoming patch as it seems unintended, but when using Flask of Fire you can do a focus ability without it actually costing any focus, which is just incredibly powerful. But don't be surprised if this is going to be changed in an upcoming patch, so I wouldn't recommend actually using it. Now then, here's how you unlock the Tempest specialization in the first place. Like with all specializations, your first step is getting to Skyhold, which will happen after certain story missions. You'll likely be around level 10 at this point. Once you are there, you'll be given the very descriptive Specializations for the Inquisitor quest. If you don't have this quest and you just arrived in Skyhold, fast travel to another location first and then go back to Skyhold immediately thereafter. What happens is that when you first get to Skyhold, the place is almost entirely ruined, but as soon as you travel away and back again, it is slightly rebuilt. It has no actual impact on the story, and you won't miss out on anything if you do this, but you likely won't have the specializations for the Inquisitor quest until you do so. This quest requires you to go to the war table and do the instant mission that is located on the board. You'll need Liliana for this, so if she's on another mission, you'll have to wait until she is back. Once you've done that, you'll get a short cutscene in which all your rogue trainers will appear. You then have to talk to the rogue trainer called Kim. He will give you the Way of the Tempest quest, which unlocks the Tempest specialization. The first step in the Way of the Tempest quest is retrieving the codex entry for the Tempest. If you have Sarah, the codex entry will be located in her room in the inn. If you do not have Sarah, you can go to the book merchant in Val Royeaux, where you can buy the codex entry for a few coins. The second step is gaining 3 essence containment apparatuses. To do this, you have to go to Storm's Coast. In Storm's Coast, there will be 3 groups of demons that you, of course, have to slay. The first is located in a small area next to the Storm's Landing camp, the first camp you get when you arrive in Storm's Coast. The second is located in an area called Apostate's Landing, and the third group is located on top of a hill next to a river appropriately called Long River. The first group can be easily accessed by going to the Storm's Landing camp. It's the very first hill to the south. This group consists of 1 Despair Demon and 3 Wraiths. After killing this group, they will drop the first Essence Containment Apparatus. The second group in Apostate's Landing is yet again on top of a hill, but instead of a Despair Demon, it contains a Rage Demon and 3 Wraiths. Kill them and get the second one. And finally, the third group is on the big hill section to the north of the Long River, near the coastline. This is the toughest group of them all, as it contains a Pride Demon and 3 Wraiths. Killing these will get you the final Essence Containment Apparatus. The third step in the Way of the Tempest quest is gathering 3 Spirit Essences. Now, chances are you already have the required Spirit Essences, as these randomly drop from demons, which you likely have picked up in previous quests, but if you don't have 3 of them, you will need to do a bit of demon hunting. You could try and get the essences by closing rifts, though this may be a slow process. If you do decide to do so, try and get rifts to spawn Wraiths or Terror Demons. Shades generally drop Shadow Essence, Rage Demons Fire Essence, Despair Demons Ice Essence, and Arcane Horrors drop Arcane Horror Hearts, so you'll want to be killing the Wraiths and Terror Demons specifically, and even then it is but a random drop chance. Plus keep in mind that higher level rifts will drop crafting materials that are higher levels as well, and you need the first Spirit Essence tier. I would highly recommend going to the Fallow Mire, as your chances of finding Spirit Essences there are pretty high. For instance, every time I completed one of the 4 beacons for the Beacons in the Dark quest, it spawned a Terror Demon, which dropped a Spirit Essence. Furthermore, there are quite a few random Wraiths in this area that have a good chance of dropping Spirit Essence, so if you haven't completed this zone yet, I would highly recommend going here. Once that is done, go back to Skyhold and go to your Inspect Requisitions table and build the Bottle of Smoke. Then talk to Keem once more, and you can now be a Tempest. Thank you for watching, my name is Ben Haas, and I'll see you in the next video.
Well, everyone batten down, I'm about to teach your Inquisitor how to play.